Could I have my slides up, please? Yes, thank you. In the very depths of the Depression of the 1930s, a poor immigrant family here in the city of Toronto had reached that point where they had nothing, no money, and their food had run out. They had nothing. They had nowhere to turn. And they did not know by what means they might have their next meal. But they did know that there was a mission, a Jewish mission not too far away, where they were giving out food to the Jews, to the Jewish poor. It was a place they would never go to, a place they would never approach, and it was a place they would never respect. But they were in the deepest need possible. They were an Orthodox family, and the father could not possibly imagine how he could go to such a place. So they sent their son, who was about 10 or 11 years old. And the boy goes to the mission building, which is kind of right in the heart of the Jewish community. But there he stands in front of the door. And he is unable to go in. And he's unable to go home empty-handed. And he stands there waiting. He can neither go forward nor can he return. Do you know that feeling? Do you know that feeling? My friends, that's what we're going to talk about today. When you reach that point, when you can neither go forward, nor do you know how to go back. How can God reach you at a moment like that? How does God reach you in that moment? Let's turn to the scriptures. I'm going to read from Matthew chapter 8. When Yeshua came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him, and a man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Yeshua reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." Immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy, and then Yeshua said to him, "See that you don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priests and offer the gift Moshe commanded as a testimony to them." We're going to read a parallel passage from Mark chapter 1 as well. So let's move to that verse as well. So we're moving to Mark chapter 1. A man afflicted with tza'arat came to Yeshua and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, Yeshua reached out his hand, touched him, and said to him, "I am willing, be cleansed." And instantly the tza'arat left him and he was cleansed. We go to the next verse. Next one. Yeshua sent him away with this stern warning, "See to it that you tell no one. Instead, as a testimony to the people, go and let the Kohen examine you and offer for your cleansing what Moshe commanded." But he went out and began spreading the news and talking freely about it. Let's move to the next verse. No, the next slide, please. Yeshua has just changed history. He has given one of the most powerful sermons which will transform our view of the Torah. But when he comes down to the mountain, when he comes down from that place, what is his priority and what is the first thing God has him do? Transformative moments in history are not usually marked by this kind of event. But, of course, it would be wonderful to preach to you about, the Sermon on the Mount. But how much more important it is to pay attention to the first thing Yeshua does after he says those transformative words. And that's why we're here today. Yeshua's priority is the leper. The leper. You cannot go lower in Israel than this one. Why? Why? Why is his priority the leper? In order to understand this, I'm going to tell you a Jewish tale. It's one of the most fascinating tales in all of our Hagim, in all of our stories. It's about Yeshua ben Levi, Yehoshua ben Levi. Lives around 200 to 250 in the time after Yeshua. He is urgently seeking to know when the Messiah will come. And after diligently seeking, he finally succeeds in meeting the prophet Eliyahu Hanavi. Somehow he locates Eliyahu Hanavi. Now before Messiah, who comes? Eliyahu Hanavi. Well, what could be better? I found Eliyahu. Can Messiah be far behind? Probably not. We need the next slide. So he asks him, when will the Messiah come? When will Mashiach bo? Evo, where is he? By what sign will I even recognize him? Fortunately, Eliyahu fills him in on exactly all the details he's asking. Go to the gate of the city, he says. And by tradition, this is understood to be the city of Rome. Go to the gate of the city, the great city, and there you will find the Messiah sitting among the poor lepers. And there, Messiah is bandaging his leprous sores one at a time. And the rest of the sufferers bandage them all at once, but he might be needed at any time, so he can't be delayed. And Yehoshua presses him and says, so when will he come? And Eliyahu answers, he will come. Hayom, today, if you will listen to his voice. He's repeating the words of Psalm 95, verse 7, which we are so familiar with because they are already known to us from Hebrews. Let's move to the next. We'll move to the next slide. Thank you. So, the rabbis have this fascinating insight into the identity of Messiah. They call him the leper scholar. As it is said, and this is found in the Talmud Sanhedrin 98b, surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him a leper, smitten of God and afflicted. We know these verses. And if you go to any Jewish scholar, not a leper scholar, but a rabbinical scholar, they will tell you that these verses are directly speaking concerning Israel, and they have nothing really to do with Messiah's identity. But actually, the Talmud isn't saying that at all. It is telling us exactly how we recognize Messiah in these words. Surely our griefs he himself bore. Our sorrows he carried. We ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. And the concept of afflicted here is identified with the leper. But then we find out his true identity. Pierced through for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquity, and the chastening for our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourging, we also say stripes, by his stripes, we are healed. This is the identity of Messiah. This is the one Eliyahu was looking for. But it is no mistake to look for him among the lepers, because when Yeshua came down the mountain, that's exactly what he did. The leper came, and Yeshua did something transformative again. And that's what I'm going to talk about. Why was the leper associated with Messiah? And the reason is simply this. Lepers, who were the lowest of the low in the country, were associated with hopeless frustration and despair. They were the ones with whom you could identify the most broken heart, the most beaten down soul, the one who is in the most difficult pit of hurt and pain. In Matthew 8, as in Mark 1, and by the way, also in Luke 5, all three of the synoptic gospels, the disease of the common leper is referred to here by the very familiar Hebrew term which is used in the Torah, tzarat, which we would consider, by the way, relatively minor skin diseases. And if you go to your local pharmacy, you will not find, you won't find that you have to go to the pharmacist to get the cure. There are a lot of cures for tzaraat, but they often take a lot of time, and it's still a very fussy thing to deal with. However, nevertheless, it's a relatively minor skin disease for us. We would call it psoriasis, eczema. Some people have, of course, eczema, as you're familiar with, or some kind of fungal infection. Fungal infections are not, and they are frustrating and bothersome, and you have to keep applying the medications. It's not, by the way, the most serious form of leprosy, which we identify actually as something called Hansen's disease, which is a truly disfiguring disease. That's the worst leprosy. But we're just talking about tza'arat. The problem was that in Israel, if you had this condition, it was not treated as if it was minor. It was treated with extreme caution. Now, anyone who suffered from any of this kind of condition will know that it lingers, it's frustrating to deal with, but the ancients had virtually no ways of dealing with them and no medicines that could actually heal them completely. And so the way people were treated was they were shunned. They were simply shunned by the community. They were shut out. They were not allowed communion. They were not allowed connection. Their families would literally push them out the door. And in terms of the community, they became non-persons. Let's keep going. Now, one of the traditional proofs of Messiah was that he was going to cure a person with tza'arat. That was a proof of Messiah. He would be one who cured a person afflicted with tza'arat, along with curing someone of blindness, along with raising someone from the dead. Now, that misery might not seem so terrible to us. But of course, as I was telling you, they were isolated, rejected, and not even allowed into a walled city. They were allowed to wander the countryside, basically. They could go into a town that did not have walls to seek charity or help. But if they went to a shul, for example, a synagogue, they would be placed behind a mechitza, which, that's a barrier. And if they arrived, they had to leave after everybody else was gone so that they would not contaminate anybody else. But I want you to understand why tza'arat was treated like this. In Vayikra, Leviticus 13, we understand tza'arat is treated with great caution, according to these verses in chapter 13 and 14. But I'm looking at 13:45. Everyone who has tza'arat, sores, is to wear torn clothes, unbound hair, cover his upper lip, and cry, "Unclean, unclean." As long as he has sores, he will be unclean. Since he is unclean, he must live in isolation. He must live outside the camp. The next slide, please. But even more seriously, rabbinic sources, Zachal, identified the root cause of the disease as spiritual. In other words, you did not have a disease that had come to you by some means or which people could say, well, there was some natural thing going around, no, it was identified as spiritual. Plagues on Israel in the desert often began as Loshan Hara. And you know what that means? Loshan Hara is an evil word. There was somebody who spoke words that were considered evil. The most powerful case in this instance in Torah, with which we are familiar, but there are others, is in Numbers chapter 12, where Aaron and Miriam were publicly criticizing Moshe, and you remember the anger of the Lord flared up against them. And when the cloud was removed from above the tent, Miriam had sa'arat, and she was white as snow. You remember Moshe had to plead for her. And even then, she was away from the camp for 7 days. So, even those with minor tzarat left their families in shame, which, by the way, was a common state for those with long-term illnesses. People with long-term illnesses were often shut away in rooms. It's one of the aspects that we really don't talk about, but it's one of the major reasons why when Yeshua came as a healer, people came from all around carrying out of the dark rooms of Israel those begging to be healed. But the leper was the most needy of all, because no amount of offerings would remove the illness. The longer, of course, one suffered, the more you were shunned and despaired, and the less likely you were to be healed, because you were under the stress and under the circumstances which were unhealthy by their very nature. And Dr. Luke tells us, in fact, concerning the leprosy of the person that Yeshua encountered, that he was full of tza'arat, completely covered. Rabbis had a particular way of treating these people. They had nothing to do with them. Because they were spiritually understood to be under God's condemnation, no rabbi would touch a leper or go very near them either. So, once the priest confirmed that you had tza'arat, and only the priest could confirm that you were clean, and as I said, cures were rare, these were people without hope. The only hope for the leper was the coming of Messiah. So why is the story of this single leper so important? And by the way, why do all three of the key writers of the Gospels tell this story? First of all, it's an event that happened early in the ministry of Yeshua. In other words, it's one of the first proofs that he is Messiah. He comes down from the Sermon on the Mount, where he has transformed our perspective of Torah. But the first thing he does is give one of the key proofs that he is Messiah. He is not simply a teacher. He is not simply another commentator. He is not just another scholar. He is Messiah. Very, very key. And in fact, when Yochanan, who seeks a final confirmation from Yeshua that he is Messiah, his disciples receive this answer. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. So in other words, The first thing Yeshua does when he comes down from the mountain is he shows he is not simply a teacher, he is our Messiah. Amen. According to the scriptures, which Zahal agree concerning the afflicted. And more than the afflicted, the one who is now also our burden bearer. Our burden bearer. By the way, you can be almost certain, despite everything you may hear, that these are the exact words of Yeshua. That's why they are repeated. Speaking as someone who has studied the Greek in detail, I can tell you the words in Greek, they are exactly the same. This is what we call a formula. These are the words Yeshua spoke. It's not simply an interpretation or maybe somebody heard. This is what he said. I am willing. Be cleansed. You can be certain. Those are his exact words. They are known. They were repeated. You can be sure. It's exactly, if you go into a museum and see an archaeological fragment on the wall, and they say it, there it is. It's 2,500 years old. These words are the same. This is exactly what Yeshua said. He is not another rabbi. He is not another scholar. He is not another teacher. He breaks through every barrier. And by the way, he does not simply just say, all right, you're okay. He touches him. I am willing, be cleansed. And he touches him. What no rabbi would do. I am willing. I break through the barriers. When you cannot go forward and you cannot go back, hear those words. I am willing to help you. I am willing to see you break through that barrier which seems impossible. I am willing to see you come through the most painful, difficult circumstance when you know you have nowhere else to go. I am willing. Be cleansed. You think you are covered with guilt. You think you are covered with shame. You think you have nowhere to go. You wonder if you have no other alternatives. God says, be willing. Are you willing? I am willing. You're clean. You're clean. Just like when he took the fire from the coal and touched the lips of Yeshayahu, the prophet. Your lips are clean. Now go speak my word. I am willing. Be cleansed. The cycle of shame is over. The great Messianic Jewish 19th century writer, Alfred Edersheim, the great Jewish scholar, Messianic Jewish scholar of the 19th century, put it this way. The cycle of shame is over. One can understand this lowly reverence, this cry, which has so often been wrung from those who despaired of all other help. It is not a prayer, but the ground note of all prayer. Faith in his power, an absolute committal of our hopeless, helpless need. The ground note of all prayer. You know what? You know what Paul calls it? Our groans. When you are in prayer, but you have no words, and all you can do is groan. The ground note of all prayer. That point where I have no alternative. God, do you know what you're doing? And God says, do I know what I'm doing? I am willing to set you free. I am willing to see you raised up and restored. I am willing to draw you back to me. I am willing that you might rise. I am willing. Yeshua did not put limits on his power. He did not allow society to bind him, to limit him. He brought him back. He restored him to wholeness. And he gave him his personal and spiritual identity. And by the way, he even did more. We go to the next slide. He was so open to identifying with the leper that he paid the price because this man did not do what Yeshua said. He went out and told everyone what had happened, and they came flooding in need to Messiah. He went out and began spreading the news, talking freely, so that Yeshua could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed out in the country where people continued coming to him from all around. Let's keep going to the next slide. Back in the 1960s in Israel, there was this young kid. He was a wonderful, gifted violinist. But the poor boy, he had polio. He was a survivor of polio. Could barely walk. Great violinists would come and listen to him, and they'd say, yeah, he plays fabulous. He's great. He's gifted, no doubt about it. But how's he going to live the life of a traveling violinist when you're a soloist with the great orchestras of the world? You have to travel on planes. You have to go everywhere. You have to be mobile. The kid will never be able to do it. Yeah, kid's gifted, but there's no real future as a concert violinist. But one day, Ed Sullivan, who was a lover of Israel, was in Israel, and he heard this little kid play Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto. And he said, I got to have him on my show. This kid, he's an inspiration. He's got polio, but he plays so beautifully. He's like an image of Israel, raised up out of its weakness, and now become capable. He had the kid on his show. Kid was accepted into Juilliard, moved to New York, Today, of course, he's one of the most famous violinists in the world. And yes, at first he would come on stage on crutches. But the world listens to him. By the way, he'll later be in Toronto this year. He just turned 80. His name is Itzhak Perlman. What happens when you have nowhere to go? Let me tell you what happened to the kid in front of that mission. I heard the words from him personally. This story is told by one of Toronto's distinguished Messianic Jewish leaders, the late Reverend Dr. Edward Daniel Brodsky, who grew up in an Orthodox Jewish home during the Depression. When his parents ran out of food, they were desperate and sent their son to get help from the mission which Reverend Morris Zeidman ran, and about which this book and the life of his daughter is about. He stood on the sidewalk until Morris, in his clerical collar, came outside and approached him. Hearing of the family's plight, he assured the boy that there was no need to come inside. Putting some money into his hand, Morris sent him home. But that's not the end of the story. You see, Dr. Brodsky went on to become a follower of Yeshua. But in the late 1950s, he was extremely concerned, and something had happened which was powerfully limiting the future of the outreach to Jewish people of the gospel. Because for the past century, most of the missions that reached out to Jewish people were focused on what we call beneficent missions. They reached Jewish people through charity. They reached Jewish people because they were immigrants and in need. But the Jewish community was transforming. It was no longer a community in need. They were becoming middle class. They were becoming professionals. They had no need of these missionaries teaching English or offering groceries. What was the future? And the Hebrew Christian community itself was becoming tighter knit, but unable to break through to the wider community. Brodsky was extremely frustrated. He was at a conference here in Toronto, and there he met an unusual individual, Dr. Lawrence Duff Forbes. Duff Forbes had absorbed the awareness of what had been happening at the beginning of the 20th century, where a new perspective was growing amongst Jewish believers, that they had to create their own visionary community with their own true identity, which they called Messianic Judaism. Brodsky was intrigued, and he was determined to study with Lawrence Duff Forbes. So Duff Forbes said to him, "Come down to California." By the way, Duff Forbes had a radio program. It was not that unpopular. Had an interesting radio program, and he invited Ed and his family, Dr. Ed and his family, to come and spend a year with him. And that's exactly what Brodsky did. With one small one small problem along the way. See, they were going through the Rockies, and they were carrying all the stuff that his family would need. It was Ed, his wife Nora, and their two kids who were, early teens. They're going through the Rockies, and it's one of those nasty, kind of snowy, snow-covered mountain roads. And at a certain point, and it's Nora who is driving, by the way, the car stalls. And the weight of all the stuff in the trailer behind them suddenly swings across the road, and the car and the trailer both go off the mountain. That's what people behind them saw. They saw a trailer and a car literally slip off a mountain road and down the mountain. You talk about a situation where you can go neither forward nor backward, but sometimes down the mountain. Everything stopped. People rushed to see what had happened. The trailer lay shattered in the valley below. But the car had been caught right inside some kind of growth on the mountain. As soon as a tow truck arrived, they went down, put a winch on the car, and dragged them to safety. Brodsky spent the year in California. He came back. Not that long, some years ago, Dan Jester, who was the president of the UMJC at the time, and I would go on to become not only his friend, but at one time his book editor, he and I had the conversation, who is the real founder of the Messianic Jewish movement as we know it today? And he said, oh, for sure, it's Ed Brodsky. We all hated him. We used to call him Brodsky the Judaizer. But then we followed him and did exactly what he did. And he is really, in many ways, he's the father of Melech Israel. Rachmil Friedland started it, but Ed was the first spiritual leader of this ministry, the ministry you're at today. My friends, I don't know what your circumstances are or have been, but I know that in every heart we seek to grapple with Yeshua as he is and must be. He is not the leper scholar. He is not just the Messiah who came once and rose from the dead to be with us. He is God in our midst. He is Emmanuel. And when you go over the side of the mountain, he is the one who catches you. We are in his hands. We are in his hands. and you can trust him into eternity. There are some who have walked with him into much more difficult circumstances than we can imagine. But we know they are still in his hands in eternity. Purim is coming. And you know what Israel prays for when they pray for Esther? They pray that the king will extend his scepter. Remember that? They pray, will the king extend his scepter? Well, our king doesn't extend a scepter. And he doesn't offer a ring for us to kiss. He says, I am willing. And he touches you on the very inside, where the need is deepest and greatest. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Come to the Father